Welcome to Sproutcast, where we speak with changemakers, social innovators and entrepreneurs about how to make the world a better place. And now, here's your host, Julia Duffy.
Welcome back to Sproutcast. My name is Julia Duffy and today we're speaking with Krista Seddon. Krista is currently Vice President of the YWCA in Victoria. She has also served as a National Board Director for 2 years with YWCA Australia. In 2014 and 2015, Krista was selected as a delegate to the United Nations Conference on the Commission for the Status of Women, where she mobilised young feminists from around the world to advocate for stronger representation of young women in decision-making. Krista is a trained school teacher, not-for-profit manager and board director with experience in education, community and international development. She is currently employed as the General Manager of the Victorian Student Representative Council, the peak body for advocating for school-aged students in educational policy and decision-making. Welcome to Sproutcast, Krista.
Thanks, Julia. Thanks for having me on the program.
I thought I'd start today by asking you about your introduction to the NFP sector. What first kind of made you want to be involved?
Yeah, it's an interesting question when you kind of go back and you think, what was the original motivation? And I think for me, I've had sort of two areas of interest that have really, highlighted my journey throughout my career so far. And one of those areas is around gender equality and the other one around education. And I suppose for me, my passion really stems from when I was younger, and I come from a strong female family where, my father had a very strong role in shopping and domestic duties. And, I lived in an environment where those gender barriers were actually really broken down. And so I suppose when I started studying feminism and gender equality issues in university, it sort of struck me that I suppose that's where I had that conscious raising experience of saying, actually, this is not the experience of everybody, and that there's still a lot of inequality that exists for women in Australia, but also internationally. And I suppose, living overseas and working in Vietnam and traveling in a lot of developing countries, it really just cemented that passion and that need to address this issue. So I suppose for me, that's really where it started. And I think I really see education as a way of engaging with lots of people and changing the debate around these kind of topics.
Wonderful. And what would you say was your first formal interaction with organisations or individuals who were kind of actively working in these areas?
I actually think it goes back to when I was about 10 years old and I was in Girl Guides. So I did several years of Girl Guides and had, again, amazingly strong feminist leaders that were taking our group of 60 different Girl Guides in Brighton, overseas and on ski trips and all sorts of stuff. And it was all about, that young women or the young girls, are leaders of today and they are capable and empowered and should be doing, all sorts of amazing things. So, yeah, I think for me, the Girl Guide movement was pretty fundamental from the beginning, actually.
Do you have any involvement in any volunteering at that age? Or
pretty early on, I was a volunteer Girl Guide leader. So I helped out with a group of brownies that would have been maybe 7 to 10 years old. And it was sort of running weekly, activities for them and planning the different nights that we had craft night or, different activities out in the community. So I think that was probably one of the first sort of formal volunteer roles that I had. And then I suppose to complement that within school, I was very active in my Student Representative Council, my SRC, and I was involved with that right through from year 7 to 12, where in the senior years I was president and really worked hard to change the debate around the way young people were viewed within the school and change the way the school, the SRC's constitution looked so that it wasn't just a fundraising body and it actually was a decision-making body that had influence over the school council and of the direction of the school. So I think, again, you can see those two streams around education and gender equality playing out even back when I was early school days, yeah.
So maybe if we jump forward a bit now to a more formal role, one of your earlier board positions. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I've had quite a few different kind of governance roles over the last sort of 8 years, I suppose. The first one really was in 2008, where I had the opportunity to set up Young UN Women in Victoria, which basically was like a subsection of UN Women Australia. And the purpose of that was really to engage young women in a space where we could organise advocacy events, do education outreach to schools, and really engage with the broader community about gender equality and the role that young women can play within that. I think also sort of importantly about that space was that it was an opportunity for young women to really explore their leadership potential in a whole range of ways. So that was probably the first kind of formal leadership role. I then stepped onto the Red Cross Youth Advisory Board, which again was about, ensuring that youth voice was heard within the broader Red Cross organisation. And then following that, I suppose it was stepping into my work with the YWCA.
So how did you get involved with the YWCA role? It's something I'd like to learn a little bit more about, because I know they have an interesting process of getting young women onto their boards.
Yeah, they do. So YWCA Victoria is part of the World YWCA, and it's the largest women's organisation in the world. And we currently have, I think, around 125 countries in the world that has associations involved. And across the world, there's a commitment to young women's leadership. And I think the kind of interesting thing for me was that it was actually a friend that was working with me on the Young UN Women stuff that sent me the position description when it came up for the board director role. So really important networks and stuff like that has been a support for me right throughout my career. The YWCA Victoria, within our constitution, we have a requirement that 30% of directors must be under the age of 30. And that's really just to live and breed our commitment to young women's leadership. And so for me, I went through a formal recruitment process. I was actually overseas at the time. I was in India in some pretty terrible Skype connections. And I went through 2 interviews to be finally selected to be on the board, and a formal application process at the beginning. That's the way that we do all of our recruitment for the board. I've just finished a recruitment round for 3 new director positions, which I've just led. And it's very much about the board identifying the skill mix that we need on the board to ensure diversity, and then putting out a position description just like you would with a job. We receive applications, we shortlist, and then we interview. And then based on our interviews and that whole process, we then put a recommendation to our board, putting forward, the chosen candidate. So for me, that was how I got involved. It was a very formal process, but it's led to some incredible opportunities for me.
It's great to hear perspective on both your early board days and how you joined this board, as well as kind of from the other side in recruitment, what you look for in choosing new directors. Could you tell us a little bit about what kind of skills you're looking for in new board members, not just kind of specific skills to fill gaps in your board, but generally what your expectations are?
Yeah, absolutely. So our board goes through a formal evaluation process where we do look at, the skill set and skill makeup of current board directors, so that there is kind of a piecing the puzzle together where you can actually say, okay, we might at this stage be lacking legal skills, so we really want to go out and recruit someone with legal skills, or we're looking for someone with networking, stakeholder engagement skills, and that's the specific skill set that we're going out to recruit. But I suppose there's a few things that kind of overlay that. And for me, when I'm sitting on the panel and I'm reading through applications, the most critical thing really is values alignment to our organisation. So we're looking for women that, come with a strong commitment to feminism, with a passion for advocacy around gender equality. And that really then needs to be coupled with their professional skill set that, is useful for our board at that time. So, yeah, I would definitely say values alignment, number one, and then couple that with, more strategic set of skills that is useful.
And is there something that when you're in the process of bringing new directors onto your board, after going through that initial process yourself, and what kind of have you learnt about what board membership means and what the role is about? That is there something that is there knowledge that you impart to new directors that you kind of wish that you'd had at the time when you first joined the board?
Sort of, I suppose. I think when I first joined the board, I was 25 and I didn't have a lot of experience in governance, to be honest, informal governance requirements. And so I've had to do a lot of learning about, my specific, what the law expects of me as a director, and also my specific duties and legal responsibilities as a director. In terms of our board, we provide an induction process to new directors, which I found very useful, and that's sitting down with our CEO and with our president at the time and going through the ins and outs of the organisation. There's also an opportunity to sort of visit some of our programs and services, which was fantastic, and it kind of provides that human connection to the work that you're doing. But there's also a really useful mentoring program that the Y puts in place. And at the beginning, basically, they identified an existing director that had similar experiences or useful experiences that might help me specifically. And we were paired up. And I actually my mentor was Laura at that time, and we met monthly for coffees before board meetings to just get me across all of the information. And I suppose my situation was slightly unique because I stepped onto the Victorian board but also the national board at the same time. So it was actually like double responsibilities. And Laura had previously also been a national board director. So she really was able to talk me through the ins and outs of both boards, how they work together, all of the nuances and even background about fellow directors and their expertise and skills. So for me, that mentoring opportunity was critical in terms of making me feel supported and comfortable on the board. And now in my role as vice president, I often try and reach out to directors on our board to say, let's just have a coffee or a chat informally, because I do think that, good decision making is made when it's a safe space and a supported space, and, relationships come first. So if we know that we have a good foundation for our directors, we know that we're going to get the best kind of decision making.
So it sounds like it's a kind of a combination of making sure people are familiarised with the skills, but also that they're comfortable in the board environment and that the relationship between the board members is clear
Positive.
And good communication. Yeah, positive relationship. Is that something that you foster outside of specifically in the formal kind of boardroom sitting?
For us personally, we've just started. We do have meetings that happen outside. So subcommittees happen outside of the formal board meeting, and our president works hard to touch base with directors outside of the board meeting. But we do things like we're just trying to implement a few more like social drinks after the board meeting. So again, it's that opportunity to catch up and after in a more informal way. I should mention as well that early on in my board career, I got a scholarship to participate in a not-for-profit foundation board director course. And for me, again, not coming with a huge amount of governance skills, I found that incredibly useful because there are a lot of legal and financial requirements that a director needs to be across. And I think, having a bit of formal training in your first role is incredibly useful, just in terms of getting across what the law expects of you personally, what you're required to do, but also just to get a more clearer sense of what is the core work of a board as well. And I found the opportunity to learn about that in quite a systematic way, but also to networking with other not-for-profit board directors that were, going through the same learning curve as me, really useful.
So when you mentioned earlier about some of the more professional skills that you're looking for in prospective directors, are things like training, other kind of professional development. Is that something that you would consider highly in a prospective board director? And is it expected, as you mentioned yourself, that you joined the board without necessarily having that knowledge?
I don't think it's expected. I mean, I think the YWCA is really committed to, as I said, building the capacity and leadership potential of women and young women in particular. So we recognise that a lot of younger women don't have previous board experience. So we are really comfortable with that. So I do think, though, that there's things that every director needs to know in terms of, what is the core work of governance? So in terms of setting the strategy of the organisation, in terms of, appointing our CEO, in terms of approving budgets, making sure that we are fiscally responsible, meeting our legal requirements to our members and our funders and the regulators, and also just in terms of like the external relations work to stakeholders and members, being present at events, that kind of thing. So those are the kind of core work of the board that is sort of that's governance in a nutshell. Whether we expect every new director to have all of those skills, absolutely not. And I think that's the reason you have a board of 10 women sitting around the table. It's because each one of us bring a different lens and a different perspective and a different set of skills and experiences that they bring to the decision-making table. And it's like the more diversity you have around the table, the better the decision is going to be, because you're going to have, I don't have a strong financial background, but my colleague, I have two colleagues that sit around the table that are CFOs of different organisations and companies. So they're going to bring a very different experience to me, and we are able to question and challenge each other on different decisions. So when someone's looking to apply to a director role, it does really, as I said again, it's about values alignment to the organisation and seeking out an organisation that, you feel passionate about. And then it really does depend on, kind of what is the skill mix of the board at that particular time, and what direction are they looking to go in. So for us, we've just been recruiting for someone with housing skills specifically. So that's a core area of our business, is social housing. And so we're really looking to get someone that can bring that knowledge and expertise onto our board. We also are recruiting for someone with finance and commercial experience. And we kind of identify that as a specific skill set that we want to, ensure that we have covered on our board. So, I mean, my advice to people looking to get involved in governance and board positions is, often it's quite useful to identify the type or kind of organisation that you're interested in, and then actually, literally Google on their website who are the directors and see if you can have a coffee with them. Get in touch through LinkedIn or Google and just say, I'm really passionate about the work that you're doing. Is there a way that, I could be involved in supporting the governance of your organisation? And I had a fantastic story recently where a young woman I met said that she'd been volunteering for a not-for-profit board, and her role was to take minutes during the board meeting. And I think these experiences are useful because it gives her insight in the way that a CEO reports to a board. It gives her insight into the flow of a board meeting, and then the way the board responds to board papers and to strategic decisions that they need to make. So I think there's a number of different ways of getting involved, but I think sometimes it's having the conversation is a good first step.
It's great to hear you being so passionate about being involved in governance and about getting people who maybe don't have necessarily a big background in that area, just getting involved at a lower level and working out how it all works and how they can contribute. And I'm interested to know why joining a board was of interest to you, why you wanted to contribute in that way. You mentioned earlier kind of the advisory positions before you joined the YWCA board. Was there something about governance that spoke to you?
Yeah, so specifically for me, the core of my desire to be on the board of the YWCA stems from my passion around gender equality and wanting to see change on gender equality. I feel frustrated every day by the inequality that still exists in this country, and for everything from pay equity to representation to the violence against women that we see, in the weekly deaths of women from intimate partner violence. And I'm really proud of the work the Y is doing to chip away at that inequality. When I think about where my skill set's best suited, I think that I'm quite good at providing support strategic support, networks, and communication channels. So I guess when I identify those kind of three areas as skills that I could provide the organisation, it was a sort of natural fit to stepping into a governance role. And I think that really is up to the individual, because there are loads of ways that you could be involved with a not-for-profit, and I'd love to explore them with you later. But I do think governance, if you're interested in the big picture, in strategy, in, the broad changes within the not-for-profit sector, there's incredible changes happening at the moment, and it's quite exciting to be having to continually think about them, to think about how the Y can be on the front foot. As I said earlier, we've been around, or I'm not sure if I did, but we've been around since 1855. I think that's like 130 years. And I mean, as a director, I'm committed to ensuring that we're around for another 130 years to keep doing the awesome work that we're doing. So primarily it was about passion for the issue. I think the added benefit of being on a board is it has been quite interesting in terms of how it's helped my professional career. It's helped with internal promotion and opportunities. And I had another colleague recently who sits with me as a director on the board say that when she was appointed to her first CEO role of a not-for-profit, she was actually able to point directly to her board experience to articulate her understanding of governance and the way the board and the CEO interacts in that relationship to give the interview panel enough assurance that she was the right fit for the role. So I think, there's sort of interesting ways that governance experience can support your career. And I think the third thing really is about the networks and connections. I think the women on my board are fantastic, fabulous, high-achieving, brilliant women, and it's an honour to be able to work with them and call them my colleagues. So I think to, again, have access and, a relationship with fantastic women from all sorts of sectors that you wouldn't normally have in a professional career environment where you're probably just working away, on one issue or in one organisation. I think that's a really important aspect as well.
I think I'd like to kind of shift gears now slightly and move on to something you just mentioned when you were speaking then about other ways of contributing to the sector outside strictly the governance area. And I think there's a kind of a growing trend perhaps with people of your generation, and I guess also my generation, of wanting to combine their passions for society, for a particular cause, with their skills. And that may be within their current employment or it may be outside of that. I just was interested to hear your thoughts on different ways that people are doing this that you've seen and that you're involved in, and kind of suggestions for other people about how they can get involved in something like that.
Definitely. So for me, I've always seen the value in volunteering. And I think, professionally it's opened doors for me and networks and incredible opportunities. Julia, you mentioned earlier about, recent trips to New York to attend the Commission for the Status of Women at the United Nations. And I mean, those kind of advocacy opportunities are, was a pie in the sky dream for me, 5 years ago. And through the Y, I've had that opportunity for international engagement. So I think when I sort of hover up and I think about, okay, what's broadly the ways that somebody could get more involved with a not-for-profit, I think there's four things I'd say. One is around giving an individual philanthropy. And I mean, I think it is something that's important for our generation to be across. Peter Singer talks about the ideal amount that you're supposed to give of your wage is 30%, which might be quite high for quite a lot of people. But in all honesty, individual giving to a cause that you are passionate about or an organisation that you're passionate about is so important and can go a long way to creating social change. An innovative way for individuals to get involved with not-for-profits is around individual giving, and we've seen a really interesting growth in this area. From my perspective, coming from the feminist gender equality space, we've seen a growth in giving circles, and giving circles are a really interesting way that people with a shared interest or a shared passion can come together. And the way that it works generally is that you would have 100 people come together. Each person would contribute $500 up front, and you would work together with that group of people for, say, a year. You might have different speakers and education opportunities throughout the year. You might get different organisations that align to your issue or your passion to come in and present. But ultimately it's about saying instead of just $500 that you give, you've actually got $50,000 to give. And that's, with 100 people, that's huge impact that you can see for an organisation. So for me, in the feminist space, there's been some incredible work around young women's giving circles and the power of young women coming together around an issue to actually fund that and to see the change that they want to see. Another area of interest for our listeners might be around advocacy. And I just finished the Australian Centre for Progress Fellowship program last year, and I was lucky enough to be learning with incredible advocates and campaigners from around Victoria, from all sorts of sectors, everybody from animal rights to human rights to aged rights. It's incredible the work that's happening. And I do really encourage people that are interested in getting involved with not-for-profits and behind a specific cause to not disregard advocacy. Every online petition that you get sent by your email has huge impact. There's people working behind the scenes that are doing a lot of hard work to kind of create change in our society and to see progress. So I think, a first step really is about signing those online petitions. And then the next step is really maybe getting involved with a local group or getting involved with a higher level campaign, whether it's a political campaign or a campaign around a specific issue. And a lot of those different advocacy organisations, whether it be Animal Australia or Amnesty International, they have channels for people to really get involved with their advocacy campaign. And even if you have no experience, they actually provide training and support to help you in that work. So I think, advocacy is a critical and important way for you to get involved. I think the third way for a person to get involved with a not-for-profit is through volunteering and internships at an operational level. So this is something I did with with UN Women Australia. I applied through formal process to complete their internship in Canberra. And it was a 3-month internship where I had the opportunity to do briefing papers for very high-level conferences that were happening around gender equality. I also went over to South Australia and did a speech on World AIDS Day. There was all sorts of incredible opportunities that I was given access to. But again, it's also the networks and the people that you meet along the way. And so I would really encourage people to seek out organisations, not-for-profits, charities that they're interested in and say, is there an opportunity here for me to volunteer or to do an internship with you? And I think the more specific your skill set is, the more potentially useful you could be. But often it's about having that first conversation with people because, as we know, not-for-profits are often operating on a low resources, low capacity, and sometimes it's hard to find the time to go out to market to say this is the skills we need. So if you actually approach them and say, I'm willing, to give a day a week or a few hours a week to do X, Y, Z, often or more often than not, the not-for-profit, from my perspective anyway, if someone was to approach me, I would be pretty impressed with the initiative that's been taken, and I would work pretty hard to try and find something that would work for that person. And I think, as I've sort of talked about right throughout this podcast, the fourth area to get involved really is in the governance. And I think the thing with governance is that even if you don't go into a directorship straight away, into a board position straight away, lots of boards have subcommittees that are a really great stepping stone for getting on the board. So, for example, we have a finance, risk and audit subcommittee, we have an investment subcommittee, we have an engagement subcommittee, and all of those are opportunities for people that are not directors to come in and sit in that meeting to get to know directors. And so when a formal position might come up, that might be a way that then you could step on to the board. And I think I'll just mention now as well, Julia, that recently the Victorian government made a commitment to ensuring 50% representation of women on every government board. So currently there's a lot of vacancies being advertised in Victoria. And if there are women that are interested, that are listening, I'm sorry I'm speaking to women specifically here, but that's the push at the moment. You can sign up to the Victorian Women's Register, and I'm pretty sure there would be something similar in every other state around Australia. And you can sign up for email alerts that will tell you about upcoming board positions. So once you kind of know the channels, there's so many ways that you can be involved with not-for-profits and with charities. And I think more often than not, they want to work with you. It's just really about making a connection.
I think that's probably provided a lot of inspiration to people who are looking for a way to get involved and to share their skills and to share their passions. I think it's probably a good point for us to leave our discussion today. If there's anyone who wants to get in contact with you, Krista, to learn more, to ask you any questions, how should they do that? Could they contact you on Twitter or?
Absolutely, Julia. So I'm on Twitter, which is Krista, Krista_Seddon, Seddon. And you'll see me tweeting a lot about feminism and gender equality. Alternatively, I'm also on LinkedIn and, really keen to connect up with people that would like to know more about governance, about the why, and about, the gender equality space more broadly. So I would be happy to chat.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for speaking with me today, Krista, and thank you on behalf of our Sproutcast listeners.
Thank you so much, Julia. It's been a pleasure.
And finally, just a reminder to listeners that there's just over a month to go until Sprout Summit. If you're interested in learning about starting organisations, joining boards, sustainability and scalability, incubation, crowdfunding and legal requirements of board directors, you should join us to discover the practical tools, processes and insights needed to create positive impact and drive successful change. Book your tickets today at sproutsummit.com. We look forward to seeing many of you there. And if you can't make it to the event, don't forget you can also follow us on Twitter. We're at Sprout Summit, or follow our event hashtag Sprout15.
Did you enjoy this episode of Sproutcast? Visit sproutcast.net to sign up for our newsletter. The newsletter includes copies of the show notes and additional content from each episode.